The idea for this video came to me spontaneously about an hour ago, and I'm nervous to talk about it, but for whatever reason, it feels like the perfect time, if there is such a thing. And I want to talk about what it's like, what it's been like for me to watch somebody dying, or however you want to put it. And the person in question is my mother, who passed away about a year and a half ago to this day. And the experience was not really anything like I imagined. And that's why I think it's useful to talk about it here and to share about it, because it's not something that, a lot of people will have experienced yet, but I think it's something that everybody will experience at some point. And maybe it's good to be prepared. Maybe it's just about understanding that something like this is going to happen at some point. And I don't think a lot of people really talk about it. I don't think a lot of people really think about it. And of course, with good reason, because society is set up in such a way that distracts us from death and the reality of it as much as possible. It sort of pushes it away, kind of like if you have like garbage and you spray Febreze over it to kind of mask the smell, but you can only really mask it for so long. And that's really what I want to talk about, to remove the aroma and just sort of look at it for what it is. So, as I said at the beginning of the video, my mum passed away about a year and a half ago. And I got to be with her whilst this was happening. Just as a bit of context, she'd been ill with a brain hemorrhage for about 9 months before she passed away. And then when she died, it was quite unexpected. Her condition deteriorated real quick, and she went to hospital. I flew over from where I was staying at the time, and I was there with her for about the last 2 weeks. And I was very lucky. I feel very lucky because I got to say goodbye to her a few months before. She'd been ill. She was paralyzed essentially from one side of her body, but she could still talk, and she was in sound of mind. And we had a very sweet time where I told her I loved her, and I said everything that I wanted to say. Of course, I didn't realize that she was going to pass away soon. But it was lucky for me to have that experience. When I came back to the UK, where she was already in hospital, she was already unconscious, so I couldn't communicate with her. I couldn't have a dialogue with her anymore. I could speak with her. Obviously, I wasn't sure if she could hear me, but we never spoke again after that initial goodbye, where I thought it wouldn't be the final goodbye. My mum was a very successful woman, very popular. She'd been taken ill, I always say this, although it might not make sense, in the prime of her life, in that she was very full of life. She was working, volunteering. She had a dog that she walked. She exercised every day. She was not somebody who seemed frail or seemed that she was mortal. And I think, of course, being my mother, understanding that she's mortal was probably something that's also psychologically difficult for me. And my grandmother had died when I was younger. My grandparents on both sides of my family are all gone, and had been for some years. But she was the first person who was really, really close to me who's passed away. And I remember coming to the hospital. She went from a ward where there's like lots of people, lots of activity, and it's kind of an annoying place of like beeps and noises and people coming and going. And they put her in a very different space. It was this beautiful room, sort of on the quiet side of the hospital, where there was a window. The room was like painted nicely. There was a bed. There was this sort of breeze that came in through the window. Sunshine came in, and it was almost like I don't know, like a sanctuary or something like that. It had a very, very different vibe. And of course, she was put in this place because we knew that this was the end. She wasn't going to recover. And it's like the whole kind of attitude towards towards people in this state in the healthcare system changes. They go from being like, okay, you got to get better at all costs, to just sort of accepting the inevitable. And it was actually a much more wholesome environment. So I come into the ward where she is, and she looks really different, very frail, kind of ugly appearance, and just not at all well, obviously. And what struck me about it was that for all of the achievements that she'd had in her life, all of the friends that she had, she was a very popular person. The feeling was that whatever she was experiencing, I don't know if she was experiencing anything because she was unconscious, but that it was a very, very personal and almost solitary experience. Like nobody could share that experience with her. It was something that she was going through on her own, and of course we could be there, her friends and family, but it was something that we couldn't kind of do with her or for her. And I would come in most days with my aunt. We would drive into the hospital, we would spend some time there, and we'd just be like, well, what can we do here? We just leave, go home and talk, and then come in the next day, etc., etc. And she was wearing an outfit that somebody had chosen for her. It was like some of her clothes. She had a necklace that she loved, and all of her belongings were just in a plastic bag in a drawer. There was nothing really there. You know, she was somebody who was fashionable. She had a whole wardrobe of clothes and a house that she'd designed, and all of that just kind of was going to be left behind. And it was also interesting to see how the people around her responded. She had a lot of friends, and people sort of reacted in different ways that were surprising to me. Some people were kind of available when she was sick, but when it came time that she was going to pass away, they sort of faded away and didn't really come and visit. They didn't spend so much time with her. But some people really did, and they were there, and they spent hours by her side. I wasn't there for a lot of it. Her ex-husband came, so I got to reconnect with him. I hadn't seen him, my stepfather, in quite some years. And the whole thing was not as I'd expected at all. I'd expected it to be a lot of visitors. I'd expected it to be a lot of activity, but it was actually a very quiet time. And people were not necessarily available in the way that I thought they would be. When she did pass away as well afterwards, there was some people kind of came forward and they were like, oh, let me know if there's anything we can do. We want to help, blah, 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 blah. Other people, they just sort of disappeared, and, they'd been friends with her when she was ill or when she was healthy, but everybody had their own reaction to it. One of her best friends would email me like every few days and say, she missed my mum and all this kind of stuff, but she never came to visit. She didn't come to the funeral, anything like that. I don't know really why I'm saying all this, or if there's any point to what I'm saying. It's just that I never had the experience of seeing somebody die before, particularly somebody that was close to me. And when my mum she'd been ill, but she'd been recovering, there was this huge focus on the recovery from the stroke. So she was doing exercise, she was doing physio and all these kinds of things. But there hadn't been any real work or acceptance from anyone that this was her life now, that she was going to be paralyzed, or that her life had really dramatically changed. There was a very positive attitude that that everybody took on, and they sort of put it upon her. Maybe I was the only person that, we were very close. I was the only person that was there to sort of be with her, to integrate whatever was happening. But when it came to the end, I sort of realized that there was really nothing left for me to do other than to just be with her in body and in presence, and just sit and sort of be by her side in whatever capacity I could. And whether she realized I was there or not, I'll never really know. So I don't really know if this is an interesting video. I think it's a strong inquiry, a strong video. I don't mean that it's a good video, but there's something about it that woke me up, and I realized that death is such a taboo in our society. It's something that we, as I said at the beginning, we push it away. We try and pretend that it doesn't exist. But death has no real interest in what we want. It's something that can come surprisingly. It can be something that comes sooner or later than we expect. But I see it like you're walking backwards off the edge of a cliff, and because you're walking backwards, you can't see where that cliff is going to be. And there's not some great message like, you have to live every day like it's your last, or, life is short, or anything like that. It's more just that it was a very sobering, transformative experience, and one in a way that I feel some gratitude for, because when my mother was alive, I was kind of running this sort of parallel story with her. We would, keep in touch, and I would know details of her life, she would know details of mine, and we were sort of living in these sort of parallel narratives. But when she passed away, and in the days following, along with very acute grief, I suddenly saw her life kind of pop out, almost like a story, like a book, and it had a beginning, a middle, an end. And suddenly, because the last chapter had been written, it had been completed, I could appreciate her life as one arc, one story. And I could see kind of her humanity and all of the ages, from a little girl right through to an elderly woman, sort of at the same time, like a picture. And it transformed my relationship with her, obviously, because she was no longer around. She is no longer around. But it also sort of taught me that, she was just a person. Her being my mother was just a part of her life. She also had all of these other things going on. And in the time since, I've been through this grieving process. It's kind of come in waves. Initially, it was very strong, and then like ripples kind of coming from a stone that's been dropped in water. The grief was very acute, very compressed, and then it sort of became softer and wider and more spaced out. And recently it's just surged up again, which is perhaps why I'm talking about this now, because I talked to people a lot about it at the time. But for some reason now it's coming back, and I feel compelled to talk about it publicly. So I don't know if you're going to get anything from this. If I'm going to get anything from this is perhaps the more pertinent question. But if you've had an experience like this, I'd love to hear about it. If me talking about this has sort of triggered or inspired something in yourself, then I'd love to hear about that too. And maybe we can have a chat in the comments and have a think about what this all means. So thanks for your time.